That's lovely. Thank you so much, wonderful woman who's recording this. Here we go. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. If you are a regular viewer, you know that usually the doctor finds herself in the consultation room with an unsuspecting author, but every so often, well, there's time to augment the treat that we have in store. I am very grateful to Susanna Pedden from HarperCollins, who has organised it so that we actually have 3 authors with us for this. Hello, Karen, are you back with us? I thought we were going to lose you there. Are we okay?
Sorry, there was noise from outside and I just thought I'll just shut the door.
So. Fabio, I thought we were going to lose you and we haven't. Yeah, excellent. No, thank you for getting rid of the noise. So today's panel, today's grouping of authors, it is billed as the new wave of Scottish thriller. And I think that's quite a tall order to live up to. However, I think if you have the opportunity, which I hope you do, to sit yourself down with the 3 books written by these fabulous authors that we're going to be discussing, you'll understand probably why this panel was named so. Now, I have to ask the authors, I read your work online, Kindle, so I wonder, do you have a copy of the books that we're going to be discussing? Would you do us the honours and give us the glorious showing of said novels? Yes, Rebecca, go get one. That would be wonderful.
Go and get one as well.
And of course, I think probably for myself, if I had 3, it could be quite a juggling act. And so I think it's better if each proud owner of said book lets us see them, because I do think the covers and I want to ask about those, because they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, do they not? However, I think your covers are quite something else. Are you ready?
I don't have a copy. I'm actually moving house, so everything I own is in a box.
It's in a box.
It didn't even occur to me. So stupid.
Oh, well, look, don't worry, because we'll discuss it, and you can describe it, and we'll get in there. So, Rebecca, Carolyn, would you care to hold us up your books there? Oh. Still Water and the Ghost Woods that magically came in there, which was wonderful. And Carol, yours is The Black House.
Yes, I've just remembered where I have a copy, actually. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, this is great. I love the informality of this. It's really good. Viewers, listeners, I hope you're settled with a cuppa, or maybe a little something stronger if you do that, because I must say the things we're going to be discussing may need a little toddy or something like that. Yay! Come along, show us that Black House.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really nice.
Isn't it? So if you wouldn't mind, at one point, authors, I am going to ask you to talk a little about the cover and what you feel it does with regard to presenting the story to the readers, and what it is that you really like about it. But yeah, let's start. I suppose we should say we are going to be discussing some tricky subjects here. And so just to say that to our viewers, our listeners, but I hope that we're going to discuss those subjects in such a way, because they are things that need to be talked about. And I think the way you as authors have approached these topics and have enabled us to take a moment and to think about these things from the safety of your writing. I think, again, we so easily and glibly talk about books that are published. But I think when those topic areas are difficult, and yet you allow us to go there and you keep us safe while you take us there. So thank you. Thank you for that. Let's start by talking about, if we can, your main characters. So, Carol, you give us Maggie McKay and Robert Reed. And Carolyn, you give us Mabel Haggarth and Pearl. What's her second name, Pearl?
Gorham.
Gorham, that's it. I want to say Gotham. You can see where my brain is. Gorham. And Rebecca, you give us, it's mainly Jane Douglas. I know there are other characters, but this is Jane's story, and I know other characters wander around and fill that in. So, Carolyn, do you want to set off for us? And again, giving nothing away, but talk to us, introduce us to these two characters.
Yes. So my novel, The Ghost Woods, has two main characters, young women. One of them is just 17 when the story begins, and she's called Mabel Haggarth, and she is she works in a bakery in Dundee, and it's 1959. And she meets Pearl Gorham, who was a nurse, and she is 22 when the novel begins, but because she is pregnant, she has been fired. I should say, because she's pregnant and unmarried, she has been fired with no chance of returning to her job. And I think they're a good team because they team up. Pearl she's been a nurse. She's very very capable, very independent, a real mover and shaker. And Mabel has a secret, and she's deeply traumatized as well. Mabel is pregnant when the story begins too at 17 and doesn't know how she is. So she's her encounter with Pearl, I think, really is the best thing that happens to her.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And already then we have one of our themes, motherhood, and motherhood that is complicated. I mean, I think motherhood in and of itself, is no walk in the park. But you bring us maybe a tale of motherhood that takes on extra dimensions and extra difficulties. So thank you for that. Thank you. Carole, talk to us about your main characters.
So the Black House is set on a fictional island called Kilmarie, which is off the west coast of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. And the main character is Maggie Mackay. She's a very troubled woman. She's kind of been haunted really her whole life by what she believes happened on this island 25 years ago in 1994. And as a child, she claimed that someone on Kilmarie had murdered a young man called Andrew McNeil, also known as Robert Reed. And this kind of claim, it created a huge media frenzy. It caused rifts between locals that never really kind of mended. And so her kind of unexpected and strange return threatens to reveal many, many secrets that a lot of the islanders would rather remain hidden, and kind of forces Maggie very quickly to consider how much she's willing to risk, to actually discover the horrific truth of what actually happened in 1994. And the character of Robert Reed, of Andrew McNeil, he's also a very, very troubled young man. The actual novel focuses on his childhood, on this huge kind of event that happened in his childhood that basically has shaped his entire life, his whole personality. And then it also follows the last sort of 9 to 12 months of his life, right up until his death, as a way of explaining how everything sort of came about.
Thank you so much. And there, of course, we have this theme running through of the Scottish aspect of our stories, and we'll be weaving that in. You bring us what could be seen as something as otherworldly as well. So we've got folklore that we're going to be discussing. We've got those threads of folklore. We've got threads of the Gothic weaving through our discussion. So thank you for that. And of course, those settings. And I am intrigued again of the magic that you all weave in from the comfort of our own homes. You take us to those places. You can feel. the woods. You can feel the coastline, the sea, the remoteness. How do you cultivate your magic to do so? What a beautiful gift you all have. Carole, thank you for introducing your characters. So, Rebecca, please tell us about your main character.
Yeah, so Jane lives on Unst, which is the most northerly of the Shetland Islands. And she's a woman in her early 30s, and she lives a very almost monk-like existence. She lives in a caravan. She works in a fish processing factory. She spends her days kind of not really talking to anyone. She keeps herself to herself. She's got an elderly neighbour called Maggie, who she kind of checks in on. She's just started seeing someone, a man, and she's kind of, for the first time in her life, kind of got a bit of happiness. But she's kind of hiding from something in her past, some awful event that happened to her. And then a prosthetic arm is discovered floating in a lake in Devon, and it's her mother's prosthetic arm. Her mother went missing 20 years ago. And so the novel then unfolds from there, because the thing that she was trying to repress or run away from that's been haunting her is her mother, her connection to her mother, what her mother did. And so that's kind of all unravels. So again, yeah, trauma, isolation, coastline, motherhood. So all of these themes kind of, yeah, must be something in the water, mustn't there?
Yeah, I reckon there must, and so you, thank you, because you bring me to my next sort of like question that I'd love to ask before we go to settings, and why you chose the place that you chose, you know, to put your novel. And it's that sense of the story. I don't want to talk, I don't mean the inspiration, but I mean the story. And when did the story start to grow in you? What was the catalyst? You know, if we talk this about the idea of motherhood and giving birth to something, and so the gestation of a novel, but when can you look back and say the seed of this started for me? What triggered that? Carole, do you want to set us off on that one?
Yeah, I think I'm terrible at answering these questions because there's always quite a lot of different things that kind of build up. I have lots of different ideas, and then all of a sudden one day I'll think, oh yes, that can kind of work together. I lived in the Outer Hebrides for a little while. I lived in Lewis, and I think a lot of the things that happened to me when I lived there, I've used a lot of the things that I saw. There is a particular event I remember from when I was a teenager. I wasn't living on Lewis then, I was in mainland Scotland, but it was something that I remember happening on the Outer Hebrides, and it was on Barra, which is the sort of southernmost island. And I can't say what it is because that would be an absolutely massive spoiler, but that was one of that was one of the ideas. And then when I lived in Lewis in 2017, I remember we were staying in a very remote part of Lewis on the west coast, so on the Atlantic coast. And a couple of days before we arrived to this kind of remote settlement called Cliff, a man actually washed up on the beach outside our cottage. He was a surfer, I think, from Germany, and he'd been surfing in the beach kind of further north. And the way that a lot of the tides work, when you have a big beach in the north, then the smaller beach kind of to the south of that is where a lot of bodies might wash up just because of currents. And so that kind of, I mean, as awful as it is, that kind of triggered an idea.
Yeah.
There's also this place, I mean, I've been visiting the Hebrides for years and years, but there are so many memorials to shipwrecks and to just kind of disasters all along the coast, especially on the west coast. And there's a particular memorial in a place called Yorpi, where two fishing boats with all the fishermen on board were killed right in front of their families in this village. And there's a memorial there that I go to see every single time. It's such an affecting memorial. It's right next to this burial cairn of the only fishermen that they were able to recover. And Yorpie really is just one street. And when you look at this memorial, it lists all the fishermen that died. And then their house number, it's like 1 Yorpie, 3 Yorpie, and it's almost every single house. So the whole village really lost all their men, it almost overnight, and they had no means to support themselves. And that's a story that I've kind of had in my head for years and years, because it's so dreadful. I mean, it's not a unique story on the islands at all.
Yeah.
So obviously fishing is such a big part of it. But so it's a lot of different things, a lot of ideas, not necessarily exclusive to the Hebrides, but just a lot of different ideas that I thought, what would happen? How would that affect you as a child if you saw that happening? What would happen to your family? What would happen to your community? And so everything kind of feeds from that. I have a notebook where I have all these different ideas, and some of them all make it into one story one day eventually.
Thank you for sharing that. Rebecca, for you, was there a single moment happening that triggered the start of Stillwater?
I think it's funny because I think there was a moment when everything clicked, and I was trying to write a very different book, and it was there was a complicated motherhood in it, but it wasn't really the focus. And then I was trying to write that while I was pregnant. I became happily but unexpectedly pregnant with my son, and I think my way of dealing with unexpected things or trying to prepare myself is just to do as much research as possible into the worst things possible that can happen. So I would find myself, Googling, what happens if my baby has this awful disease, or what happens if this happens during the birth, or what happens if if I'm a terrible mother, and all these kind of things. It was a way of soothing myself, I think, of thinking, okay, I'm prepared, if the worst happens, I know, I've read up on it. And then, thank goodness, it was all fine and brilliant, and I loved being a mum, and I was really lucky. But I think all those things had kind of been fermenting in the back of my head. And then I think when my son was about maybe 9 months old or something like that, I'd been trying to work on this story, and it just wasn't happening. And I was so frustrated with it. And I ended up binning the whole thing and starting again from scratch with thinking, right, I'm going to write what I know. That's what they say, don't they? Write what you know. And what I knew was motherhood and all this kind of stuff that I'd been looking into and mulling over in my head. And it was amazing because it just flowed. The story just flowed, and it was like it just had to kind of ferment there and bubble away and kind of grow, like organically. And then, so I think it was a way of exorcising maybe all those fears and anxieties I'd had while pregnant. And that combined with the shedding of Unst, which I'd always wanted to write about, which my family had lived on before I was born. And I'd always been very envious of them getting to live in such a unique place. It suddenly clicked. So it really was like a nice moment of, everything coming together. So
Yeah, and love it, and linked again with that notion of, not just the book, but a baby coming into the world as well. Like, so yeah. Productive times, definitely. Carolyn, for you, how did this begin? I mean, did it come out of some research that you'd been doing, and did it lend itself to then a creative expression?
Yeah, I think like Carole, it's it is really hard sometimes to sort of say exactly where a story emerges, because it seems to become, I don't know, it's like a rolling stone. But I'm sorry if there's background noise. Someone has just decided to mow their lawn. Great timing.
I don't think we can hear it. So
that's great. I'm so pleased.
Yeah.
I had read, and I think we've all heard about the Magdalen laundries in Ireland. But I think I came across a few news articles about adults being reunited with their real mothers that they had been sort of taken from in a mother and baby home in Scotland. And this basically I learned that mother and baby homes were a thing. And that, you know, they were all over the UK, all over the US as well, that you know, around the time that I was born, or just before, you know, the sort of restrictions facing women were so intense that, you know, they were really pressured. If they were not married, they had to go into mother and baby homes. And as a feminist, I just, you know, I suppose my mom was 17 when she had me, and I was just sort of, I guess I was piecing together quite a bit of this. And gosh, you know, this was so recent. It wasn't a million years ago,
Yeah.
and it wasn't just in Ireland. You know, of course, that religious sort of fervor really contributed to that, but society was so restricted for women, and also birth control was extremely hard to come by, and all the sort of rules that governed women's lives. It's just, yeah, I think it just all created something in me that I wanted to tell a story. And it is very much a Gothic story, so there are other elements to it, but I think that's what really drew me to tell this particular story and to use the setting of a mother and baby home as the basis for the story.
And the idea of because if we come now to the Scottish settings, and so Dundee, yeah, but
Yeah.
is the place it's Lichen Hall, yeah, or is it Lichen? Lichen or
Like
Lichen?
Hall, yeah.
Yeah. So is there a real place like that, or is this a place that you've created around what you've read?
I think it's a little bit of both. There, near where I live, actually, there's a something hall, and you can't see the house from the road. You would have to literally drive through their gates and have a good snoop, because I've never seen the actual hall. So I think I drive past it all the time, and it's just on this corner, just like Lichen Hall is in the book. It's just on this little bend, this country road, but it must be a massive estate, because you drive past and you can just see the size of it, because there's no other housing around it. But there's these big austere black gates, and I'm just very, very curious as to what's inside. But I would have to be very nosy and literally drive into their grounds to see. So it was probably that started it.
Okay, so Carolyn, thank you for that, because you've set us now on the notion of not necessarily the place as in the geographical location, but the space in which your narratives take place. And so, Carole, if we can come to you and if we can talk about the Black House. So, I mean, black, of course, because black, dark, but why Black House? And can you describe a little bit of that house and what place it plays in the story?
Yeah, so black houses are the kind of traditional Scottish houses of the Highlands and Islands. They were predominantly used by crofters. You don't see very many. The ones that you kind of see today are mostly replicas, and they're usually self-catering holiday homes or whatever. But they're sort of one story. They're made of very thick stone walls, maybe minimum 2 to 3 feet thick. They have tiny little windows to kind of keep the Atlantic storms out. And they usually have kind of reed or grass roofs that are kind of weighted down with big rocks. They're very distinctive. Sometimes they're whitewashed. And when they were sort of traditionally used, they tended just to be the kind of old button ben system. So you'd have two areas basically where you slept and where you lived. And then the other side of the Black House would be for the livestock. And you would have this kind of fire in the center of the house, no chimney. And that was how they got their name, because the smoke just turned the whole house black. So the Black House that the actual story is based on is a place that I've stayed in quite a lot. And it's actually on Harris. And it's a replica, so it's a lot nicer than that. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's right on a cliff overlooking a beach and the Atlantic. And in the Black House, the book, it is one of the houses. It used to be the house that Robert Reed lived in when he was alive. And when Maggie comes back to try and kind of investigate his death, his murder, that's where she stays also. So the Black House is very kind of pivotal to the story, because it's where they both live. It's where she tries to find out what happened to him, and it's where he was living when he died.
Thank you. Thanks, Carole. Now, Rebecca, for you, there are two homes in a sense, because there's her past growing up, and then there's the moving north. Talk to us first about Jane's teenage home, because I found, again, because when we come on the round next time, we're going to talk about the time frame, the setting, and we've already touched on some of that, but this is 1970s, is it not, where you set us off? So talk to us about Jane's family, childhood home.
Yeah, sure. So it's very much kind of based on my house where I grew up, in Devon, in a small town. And kind of when you talk to people, when you say, oh, I grew up in Devon, people imagine you in a kind of idyllic thatched little chocolate box cottage. But we were in a sort of new build on an estate. It was very kind of, you had the lovely countryside, and it did feel quite rural, but also it's just very it was very noisy. I mean, we had like the M5 motorway behind us and the train tracks, and a paper mill behind us as well, all of which go into the book. So yeah, she finds it, she goes from Unst to Devon, and she finds it incredibly claustrophobic, because on Shetland, you can see for miles. It's just incredible. The light, you can see the weather coming in from miles away. You've got this incredible sense of space. Whereas in Devon, it's like the landscape is very much agricultural. So it's kind of chopped up into these fields, and you've got these high hedge walls, if you're driving down the country lanes and stuff. So, and she finds it, very difficult. And so she returns to Unst as an adult, and kind of breathes a sigh of relief, and is kind of, that sense of space and light is very soothing for her. Whereas other characters in the book find that setting incredibly isolating and incredibly harsh. And that was kind of based on my own family's experience of living on Unst in the Shetlands, where for my dad, he loved it because he was really outdoorsy, and he loved watching the seabirds, and he loved the weather, and he didn't mind, the gale force winds and all that kind of stuff. Whereas for my mum, I think she found it incredibly harsh, and it's a very raw kind of environment. And I think it kind of, particularly back in the 70s, when you didn't have the internet to distract you, and mobile phones and stuff like that, I think it was a place that kind of exposes yourself to yourself. I think you spend a lot of time, I don't know, kind of in this very isolated, very exposed place. So yeah, it was I liked having those two contrasting settings to play with, and kind of use them to explore the psychology of the characters a little bit.
Thank you for that. So we've touched on those different time periods that you've written in, and I made a little thing. I've got the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 90s, and present day. So you spend a beautiful time period, the three of you, giving us those insights into, especially British Scottish culture in those spaces at those times. And I wondered, in the research that you were doing around those Scottish settings and those times, if there was, again, I always come down to one thing, and I know it really reduces it, but again, for the time that we have together, if there was one thing that you discovered that you had no idea about, and it changed maybe the direction of your storytelling, or it brought something in that you weren't going to bring in when you set off on the journey. Carolyn, was there anything for you from the 50s and 60s that just was like, oh my God, I've got to get this in. I don't know how, but I will.
So when I was researching, or when I was writing this novel and doing some research, I got very, this is just the sort of bluntest way to put it, I got very interested in mushrooms. I suppose I was thinking a lot about the Gothic, actually, and I was thinking how amazing fungi is, and mycelium, and there's actually quite a bit on Netflix at the minute for anyone who's interested. Anyway, I just find this threading through my novel more and more in ways that I just sort of didn't anticipate, and I'd actually laid the groundwork for this thread, so it wasn't something I had to shoehorn in. It was like it was already there. And when I sort of was doing the second draft, I thought, oh my goodness, I've actually set this up in ways that I just hadn't been fully conscious of. So I think it was actually a bit of a lesson for me that the subconscious is so much a part of the creative process, because when we talk about writing and literature as if it's like this very smooth and organized kind of thing, but actually there's so much risk taking and experimentation and dreaming that's part of the process, that just I love, and I feel more confident now at this stage of my writing career than I would have at the beginning to take those sort of risks. And that's exciting. It's actually exciting to still feel you're doing something new and challenging yourself with each book. So it was a risk, and I did wonder what on earth they were going to make of it when I submitted it to my publisher, but luckily they liked it, so we're all good.
We're all good, and I really thank you for sharing that story with us, because again, we have people that watch who themselves are considering the writer's journey, and every time, authors are so generous with their thoughts and ideas, and from what I'm hearing, it's that sense of, don't be afraid. Something may come, to notice that you maybe should need to be bringing this in, and it might seem a bit crazy at the time, but it just
lean into it.
Lean into it, because it does justice to that story. So that was the 1950s, 1960s time period. If we go, Rebecca, into the 1970s and then. So what would you say your other time period was? When Jane goes back, it's probably
early noughties, noughties, 90s.
Yeah. So let's say from the 70s rather than the noughties. From the 70s, something that just left you feeling, oh, I had no idea, or I hadn't found that out, and this has to go in this book.
Yeah. So for me, it was, because my family had lived on Ents when my dad was in the RAF, so he was head of the mechanical transport section up there, so that was why they lived up there. So initially I started writing about an RAF family, because I thought, oh, I've got them to draw on, this will be really easy. And then I found out about the oil boom in the 1970s in Shetland, and how seismic that was for the islands. And I mean, everything culturally, economically, everything changed. Suddenly they'd gone from being this kind of peripheral kind of set of islands that nobody on the mainland kind of ever really thought about, to being just this powerhouse. They had so much power because, all these huge oil companies were fighting over trying to get a piece of this, because they had to build the pipeline to Shetland in order to get the oil to the UK to process it and everything like that. And there was this real David and Goliath battle between kind of the Zetland Island Council and the oil companies. And it was really, I mean, for that island, their way of life for years, had been kind of fishing, knitting, crofting, kind of, working with the land and being very rooted. And then suddenly it was like, okay, we're going to dig up thousands of tons of peat, we're going to build these huge factories, we're going to create all these new roads all over the island. And people were really terrified and really kind of worried about what this was going to do to the culture and this very delicate landscape and this way of life that had persisted. It's not like they were forward looking, obviously, and people were keen to have more money and and opportunities come to the island, but it was this big seismic shift, and there was a lot of suspicion of outsiders, you know, quite rightly, all these people suddenly descending like vultures to kind of, you know, make a quick buck and then leave again. And were people gonna, was the culture, was the music gonna evaporate, was the dialect gonna be watered down, all this kind of stuff. And so when I started looking into that, I thought, oh, what a brilliantly kind of potent mix to drop these characters into and to have them kind of navigate, because yeah, her father was an oil rig worker, and yeah, I mean the impacts are still being felt. They're still,
indeed,
you know, it's incredible. But that was, yeah, and lots of research into into oil and things like that, and yeah,
beautiful, beautiful. So the oil boom, fungi, and Carole, for you.
Well,
because we're going to choose the 1990s.
Yes.
Which I keep thinking isn't that long ago, you know.
I know, me too.
But oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, the main thing that I discovered that actually happened in the 90s on Barra is the thing I can't say anything about because it is a huge spoiler, but it is revealed in chapter 2, so it's not a kind of spoiler for long. So I can't talk about that really, but I would say the other thing that I used in the 90s part of the story, which was something that I did not know about the Outer Hebrides before I started kind of looking into it, was all the kind of archaeological discoveries that they've made, especially on the West Coast, especially where the kind of book is set. It was one of the first places really in Scotland that were settled by the Norse. So there's loads, you know, I mean, everybody always kind of thinks of Orkney and Shetland as being where the majority of the kind of discoveries have been made, but there's loads along the west coast of Lewis and Harris. And it's through kind of looking at that, because there is an archaeological dig in both stories, in the story set in the 90s and in the present day, that same dig is opened again, and it's quite kind of pivotal to the plot. But I discovered through kind of looking at all these old archaeological digs that had been going on round about that time and before, that parts of the Western Isles are considered thin places. That was the name I wanted to give the book, Thin Place, but I got outvoted by the publisher. But I find it so fascinating because I hadn't ever actually heard that term before. And a lot of it kind of stems from Old Norse mythology, but it's also part of kind of Celtic and pagan mythology, this idea that in certain parts of the world, in certain places, there are these, it's hard to describe, I suppose, spiritual landscapes, you know, where the walls between our world and all the other worlds are at their thinnest. So they feel kind of otherworldly almost. And having kind of been to these places, they really do. I mean, Stonehenge, for example, is supposed to be a thin place. So, you know, that kind of idea, that concept really made it into the book right at the very, very beginning. And Robert's character, he's absolutely obsessed with Norse mythology and with this idea of thin places, and the fact that a lot of people believed and believe that in thin places things happen, or you can make things happen that you wouldn't be able to do, you know, anywhere else, which is a very kind of Gothic sort of concept.
It's music to my ears. I would say that where I think I've experienced it was Iceland. I think there, and you know, I don't know whether it's a purely physical because of the location, you know, there's so many degrees north, I don't know what it is, but to feel that you could so easily slip into the other realms and what that might mean. So you bring us beautifully to the Gothic, the uncanny. Let's in 5 minutes, let's unpack. It's impossible, totally impossible, because it's just that deliciously rich way of telling stories, the folklore. Caroline, what does it mean to you to be writing within this genre, and beautifully, because, you know, it's fluid and it flows out a little bit, but you know, that idea as well as the feminist Gothic,
Yeah.
and on what does that do? So do you want to bring us in on writing the Gothic and writing the feminist Gothic, and how you feel that enables you to express your storytelling?
Well, really think that the Gothic is one of those perfectly weird genres, or the perfectly weird genre where you can just kind of slip into, you know, thin spaces or margins that sit between things. And I was thinking a lot about the Gothic actually with this novel, in new ways, and thinking about the women who were marginalized, but also motherhood, how physically othering motherhood can be, and socially othering as well. But what actually happens to your body, and the whole physical element of motherhood to me is very Gothic. There's nothing, you know, there's no other genre I think that can more adequately particular story, if you like. So that there was quite a bit of thinking through, I suppose, that weird space that the Gothic allows you to inhabit, and the series of contrasts that the Gothic, it's quite extreme, the Gothic, in terms of or it deals with extremes, I think. And yeah, I just felt like I was really writing into that, and exploring the potentials of the Gothic to tell this kind of story. It, you know, it maybe isn't immediately apparent that motherhood is a Gothic story, but to me it very much became Gothic in nature when I was writing this.
And is there any particular aspect of folklore? So
Yeah.
fungi motherhood, but were there any stories that you read that you thought, yes, this fits with what I'm trying to do?
Yeah, so the book begins with a fictional kind of extract, but it's a real folk tale of a witch called Nick Nevin, who is sort of Scotland's Hecate, or the equivalent of Hecate. And I had never heard of this witch, but there's so much learn actually in terms of that particular folklore, where the witch comes from. I had been writing this story on the Scottish borders, and I didn't really know why I set it in the Scottish borders. I think maybe I was thinking of sort of marginality and those things, but I set it in the Scottish borders, and she actually has links to the Scottish borders, which was just really just interesting. But she also has links to the Isle of Skye. It was just really, really fascinating to bring this this witch to life, and to think again about that very gendered use of the term witch and how it carries through.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. The notion of the Gothic and motherhood, when you were developing your story, did you draw on the Gothic? Did you consciously do that, or is it afterwards, only in the final emergence, that people now say, what a Gothic tale you've created, Rebecca? Because they do.
Yeah, I think it's I think I agree completely with Carolyn. It is a very it is quite an uncanny state, motherhood, and it's I think I found with my character as well, it's that idea of hauntings and reflections, and you know, when she looks in the mirror and she kind of sees her mother's face, and it's almost like, you know, her bone structure is the same as her mother. She begins to see these kind of reflections, and obviously she lives in a place, she lives just in a caravan because she can't bring herself to move into the home that her mother inhabited previously. And when she does go in there, it's like she's stepping into a kind of haunted house where everywhere she goes, she sees the mothers and her mother. And again, that was very, very much another thing that came to the forefront when I was looking at Shetland and how this community had developed. And one of the kind of traditional, almost pastimes in Shetland is something called Cooke, where you basically talk about your family history and you go back and back and back as far as you can, and it's almost like a game, like linking, like, oh, so your cousin's mother was my husband, you know, this kind of, and it's a way of situating yourself in this network, in this community, but it also served a very practical purpose of preventing sort of incest and, you know, things like that. But again, it's very it was interesting because I was like, either you could find that incredibly reassuring and think, oh, I'm part of this lovely network and this community that's really grounded and rooted here, or you could find it incredibly claustrophobic and like you're trapped in a kind of web, you know, if you wanted to break away and make your own identity. So again, it's all this kind of, and that's a very Gothic thing, I think, is the theme of mirroring and doubles and doppelgangers and haunting and, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, that was something that kind of just came naturally to the forefront. And then, yeah, there are a few more kind of overtly uncanny, ghosty moments, usually kind of through dream sequences and things, where I've managed to, I was like, I don't want to write a straight horror novel, but I love horror. So if I can drop it in sort of in a realistic way through a dream or two, that's
and isn't, I don't know whether something is happening to literature, you know, genre fiction in general, but the fact that, you know, the bleeding of the boundaries is so liberating, and I think, you know, readers seem, you know, there seems to be much more of a willingness, rather than I'm a crime fiction reader, and then and until you tick all the boxes, and please don't go outside the boundaries because it's, you know, it's what I'm used to. I think readers are so much more open to saying, okay, go on, take me down a different path, bring different elements in, because, you know, and I think it makes for a much richer reading, especially if you devour crime fiction, as many crime fiction readers do. It allows us to go elsewhere. So thank you for bringing those different elements in. Carole, you're Gothic. Tell us about what does the Gothic mean to you, and was it a joy to be able to use it in the development, you know, the weaving of your story?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to write short stories. That's what I did for kind of 15 years. And I wrote in genre then. It was always either horror or science fiction. They tended to be the stories that sold. But obviously, the Gothic allows me to kind of, just exactly like Rebecca said, to indulge that side of me, but still be able to do crime fiction or psychological thriller or Gothic suspense, whatever you want to call it. You know, to me, it's all the sort of same thing. To me, Gothic fiction is unique because the setting, just like you were talking about earlier, is so important, and it has to be sort of so particular. And then also, like a murder mystery or like crime fiction, there's always like a mystery or a secret kind of underpinning the whole story. So there's that resolution at the end, which is brilliant. But I think the thing that I love about Gothic fiction is it makes you feel things, you know, it's all about emotion, whether that's being afraid or whether that's, there's always lots of passion, there's always lots of betrayal and love triangles and lust, and it's a whole variety of things, dysfunctional families. You know, you can incorporate all of these things into a Gothic story, and you can use this kind of hint of the supernatural or darkness to kind of weave it all together. But it's not a kind of, it's not right out there, it's not at the forefront necessarily, it's just something that maybe it's a house that might be haunted, or, you know, just an atmosphere of because it's in a place like a thin place. So there's so many options, I think, with Gothic fiction. It's such a broad church that a lot of things would be called Gothic fiction and could still legitimately be Gothic fiction, but are also a lot of other things at the same time.
Such freedom, such liberty, and so necessary. Now, I am aware of the time, and you have been so kind and generous with your ideas, and I wish we could actually do a part 2 of this, because we've only begun to scratch the surface. But I asked you, and you all kindly went and got a copy of your book, because the idea of you shouldn't judge a book by the cover, but maybe we should. What is it that you are so excited about and thrilled about that cover. And what does it say to the reader as to how it will take them in to the story? I'm thinking those little breadcrumbs in Hansel and Gretel and following along the way. What breadcrumbs do we get from your cover? Caroline, do you want to set us off?
Yes, sorry, I was just trying to get the mute button. So my cover, if it will stay on the screen, I think I love this little boy here, because he's very central to the, oh gosh, what's wrong with this? He's very central to the story. And I love the way the woods are depicted with the mushrooms, because actually in Lichen Hall, which is on the back or here, sorry, it's a bit
It's
odd.
fine, we've got you, it's good.
Yeah, that's Lichen Hall, and the mushrooms. There's like a huge fairy ring that goes right around the house. So I just love that they capture that in the book, and yeah, you've got these lovely little red hints throughout, which I think just nicely offset the blue and the green. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, thank you, lovely. Carole, what about yours?
Yeah, here we go. Lose a ton. I can't ever work out how to get it to reverse.
Oh, we're seeing it beautifully. We're getting it as it should be. It's reversed for
Okay,
you,
oh,
but
good,
we're
good.
taking it in as it's meant to be.
I did an Instagram event not that long ago, and everything was back to front. It really annoyed me. So yeah, I was expecting when they did the cover for it to be literally a black house on the cover, but I'm really glad that it wasn't. I think the picture to me really kind of embodies the Hebrides, because it's got everything that this story is about. You know, it's got the landscape and the stormy sky. The crow represents the Celtic mythology aspect of it. It's a hooded crow, which is there are no other kinds of crows really in the Hebrides. The hooded crow is the main kind of one, and it's very much associated again with Celtic mythology, but also with Old Norse, because obviously you've got Odin, who's the Raven King and all that kind of stuff. And then on the back, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a tiny little black house.
Oh, yes.
Which I really love.
Yes.
And it looks exactly, you know, how black houses look. So I really like it. I think it's really striking. I wasn't sure what to make of it in the beginning, but it's really grown on me. I love it a lot.
Can I say, so far I've had two tingles when the book covers have been put up, and I'm familiar with the book covers, but they've obviously got some element of power. They're transmitting something as they go, you know, over the airwaves. Beautiful. Thank you, Carole. Rebecca, last but by no means least, come on, show us that cover.
Yeah, so this is Stillwater, and again, it wasn't what I expected at all. I expected kind of a landscape, you know, because it was so central. But I think it's beautiful, and quite a lot of people have said I couldn't work out, you know, I didn't know what I was looking at first, and then suddenly I realized it was a face. And I love it. I think because she's floating, and I saw the actual image that they'd used, that they've kind of adapted this from, and she's actually floating in a bath of milk, and I thought that's brilliant, because it's like mother's milk, motherhood, you know, she's drowning, is she drowning, is she floating, that kind of thing. And I like how kind of sparse it is, because people have described my writing as quite sparse and quite pared back, so I guess that gives a sense of, you know, that kind of, yeah, it's eerie. I was really, when I saw it, I thought, oh, you know, is she sleeping? Is she dead? Is she?
Yeah, the ambivalence that's there is, yeah.
That's it. And funnily enough, so it's being published in Germany with a completely different cover, which is beautiful again, which is like an impressionist kind of oil painting of like a croft under a stormy sky, which is very different, but they both kind of give senses of it. So yeah, I'm very chuffed. But yeah, it's funny, I found the model she was tagged by someone on my Instagram, and it's really strange seeing her looking happy and healthy and like a normal person, and not submerged in a milk bath.
Yes,
So,
not part of what can be seen as the monstrous mother. No,
yes.
not at all. Well, Rebecca, Carole, Caroline, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us on The Doctor Will See You Now, and allowing readers to get a flavour of what your latest books are about. I always say to people that join us here, and I'm sure their bank balances, hopefully they've got library tickets, that, you know, the membership, because these are books that I wholly recommend to readers, to listeners, because they just take us. And I think we're in times where we need to be taken elsewhere. And you so beautifully do that. I want to thank you so much. I hope we get the time to talk again, to go deeper and further. And as I say, I'm only sorry we haven't been able to have more time together. Wish you all the very best with these novels and future writing. And thank you for the magic that you weave. Thank you so much. And goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank you.
Vicky.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.